Sir, I'm legally parked on a public street. Am I being detained or is this consensual?
I don't need a law lecture. You're loitering. Get out or I'll pull you out.
You have no reasonable suspicion. This stop violates the Fourth Amendment.
Turn around. Hands on the car. Now.
For the record, this is unlawful, and your camera is watching.
Officer Kyle Vincent had been patrolling the streets of Chicago for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his life and drain the city's coffers of $4.5 million. He was 28 years old, a man who wore his badge not as a shield to protect, but as a hammer to intimidate. On a crisp Thursday morning in the affluent suburb of Oak Ridge, Vincent received a dispatch call that should have been routine. Instead, his response to it would become a case study in every police academy in the state, not as an example to follow, but as a warning of what happens when arrogance meets absolute authority. But Vincent didn't know any of that yet. He only knew that he was right, and that his judgment was never to be questioned. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of policing, I want to know, where are you tuning in from today? Let us know in the comments, and if you believe in holding power accountable, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring these stories out of the shadows. Officer Vincent's personnel file was a minefield of red flags that the department had conveniently chosen to ignore. In 6 years, he had accrued 14 complaints. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct, euphemisms often used when an officer is aggressive but manages to stay just inside the lines of the law. He was known in his precinct as a proactive officer, the kind who went looking for trouble rather than waiting for it to be reported. His supervisors praised his high ticket numbers and his arrest stats, turning a blind eye to the community trust he was eroding with every shift. He had a reputation for stopping luxury vehicles driven by minority men claiming they fit the description of stolen cars, only to release them after 45 minutes of humiliation on the side of the road. To Vincent, the law was a tool he owned, not a standard he served. The morning of the incident. October 14th was bright and clear. Vincent was patrolling Oak Ridge, a neighborhood of sprawling lawns, 3-car garages, and quiet streets lined with oak trees that were just beginning to turn gold. It was a place where people moved to escape the noise of the city, a place where the residents paid high taxes and expected concierge policing. Vincent liked working this beat. It made him feel powerful. He felt like the gatekeeper of a fortress. At 10:10 a.m., his radio crackled to life. Unit 4 Alpha, we have a call from a resident on Elmwood Drive. Suspicious vehicle. Black male driver sitting in a parked sedan for approximately 20 minutes. Caller states he appears to be casing the neighborhood. Vincent grabbed the radio mic, a smirk touching his lips. 4 Alpha, show me en route. In his mind, the narrative was already written. A black man in a parked car in Oak Ridge, probably a drug deal waiting to happen, maybe a porch pirate scouting for Amazon packages, or perhaps a burglar waiting for homeowners to leave for work. It didn't cross his mind that it could be a resident, a guest, or a contractor. The bias that had festered in his subconscious for years immediately filled in the blanks. He hit the accelerator, his cruiser surging forward. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to dominate. He turned onto Elmwood Drive at 10:15 a.m., his eyes scanning the street until they landed on a sleek, charcoal-gray luxury sedan parked legally against the curb. Inside sat a man looking down at some papers. Vincent didn't see a citizen. He saw a target. The man sitting in the charcoal sedan was Dr. Marcus Thorne. At 58 years old, Thorne was a figure of immense stature in the law enforcement community, though Kyle Vincent had no idea who he was. Thorne had spent 30 years with the state police, rising through the ranks from a beat cop in the toughest districts to deputy chief of the entire force. After retiring from active duty, he hadn't slowed down. He had earned his doctorate in criminal justice and was currently serving as the director of ethics and standards at the State Police Academy. He was literally the man who wrote the book on constitutional policing. The training manuals in the trunk of Vincent's cruiser Thorne had edited the last 3 editions. The protocols for Terry stops and reasonable suspicion Thorne had testified before the state Senate to get them codified into law. Thorne was sitting in his car because he was early. He was looking to downsize now that his children were grown, and he had a 10:30 a.m. appointment with a real estate agent to view the colonial-style house across the street. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie, his standard attire for a business day. He was reviewing the property disclosures and checking his emails on his tablet. He had the window cracked open to let in the fresh autumn air, enjoying the quiet of the neighborhood. He had noticed the curtain twitching in the house 2 doors down, the home of Mrs. Brenda Higgins, but he had dismissed it. He was used to being watched. In a 30-year career, he had learned that a black man in a suit was often viewed with more suspicion than a white man in a hoodie. He saw the patrol car turn the corner. He watched in his rearview mirror as the cruiser accelerated unnecessarily, the engine roaring briefly before the officer slammed on the brakes, pulling up behind Thorne's sedan at an aggressive angle. It was a tactical park designed to block escape and intimidate the occupant. Thorne sighed, folding his hands on the steering wheel, a habit ingrained from decades of training and survival. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He checked the time, 10:17 a.m. He mentally prepared himself. He wasn't worried about being arrested. He knew the law better than the man walking toward him, but he was disappointed. He had hoped the department had moved past this. Thorne watched the officer exit the vehicle. He noted the tactical sunglasses, the lack of a hat, the hand resting dangerously close to the grip of his service weapon. He noted the officer's body language, shoulders squared, chest puffed out, walking a straight line of aggression. There was no caution, only confrontation. Thorne knew the procedure. The officer should approach with caution, but courtesy, identify himself, and state the reason for the inquiry. He watched as Officer Vincent stopped at the B-pillar of the sedan, preventing Thorne from opening the door, and leaned down. Thorne lowered the window the rest of the way, turning to face the young officer. He saw the nameplate K. Vincent. He filed it away in his memory. "Good morning, officer," Thorne said, his voice a deep, calm baritone that had commanded briefing rooms for decades. "How can I help you?" The call that summoned Vincent had come from Brenda Higgins, a 62-year-old retiree who spent her days monitoring the neighborhood app and watching the street from her living room window. Brenda was the self-appointed guardian of Elmwood Drive. She believed that safety meant sameness, and anything that deviated from her expected pattern was a threat. When she saw Thorne pull up and park, she didn't see a potential neighbor. She saw an anomaly. She watched him for 10 minutes. He didn't get out. He was just sitting there, reading. To Brenda, reading in a car wasn't a valid activity for a stranger in her neighborhood. It was loitering. It was casing. She had dialed the non-emergency line first, then hung up and dialed 911 to ensure a faster response. "There's a man sitting in a car outside my house," she told the dispatcher, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "He's been there for an hour. He's watching the houses. I think he has a weapon. He keeps reaching under the seat." That last part was a fabrication, a detail added to juice the priority of the call. She knew that mentioning a weapon would bring the police faster. "He doesn't belong here," she added. "He looks dangerous." The dispatcher had asked for a description. "He's black, driving a dark car. Please hurry, I'm scared to go to my mailbox." When Vincent arrived, he was operating on Brenda's heightened narrative. He didn't see a man waiting for a realtor. He saw the dangerous subject with a possible weapon. This is the fatal flaw in reliance on biased 911. Calls the officer borrows the fear and prejudice of the caller. Vincent approached the car with his adrenaline spiking. He ignored the calm demeanor of the driver. He ignored the expensive suit. He ignored the professional greeting. "Driver's license. Now," Vincent barked, skipping the introduction, skipping the explanation. He stood with his feet apart, asserting dominance. Thorne didn't move his hands from the wheel. He looked at Vincent with a gaze that was steady and analytical. "Officer Vincent," Thorne said, reading the nameplate again. I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to know the reason for this interaction. Am I being detained, or is this a consensual conversation? Vincent's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to questions. He was used to fear. I said, give me your ID. We have reports of suspicious activity in this area. You're loitering. Now hand it over, or I'm pulling you out of the car. Loitering requires intent to commit a crime or lingering in a place where one has no business. Thorne said, his voice remaining level, almost like a professor lecturing a student. I am parked on a public street waiting for a real estate appointment at 10:30. That is not loitering. As for my ID under state law, unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to identify myself. Vincent felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. It was the anger of a man whose authority was being checked by someone he viewed as inferior. You want to play lawyer, Vincent sneered. Get out of the car, now. The command hung in the air, heavy with implication. Get out of the car. It was a lawful order only if the stop itself was lawful, and Thorne knew that Vincent was skating on thin ice. Pennsylvania v. Mims allowed officers to order drivers out of vehicles for safety, but the initial stop still had to be valid. Thorne made a calculation. He could refuse lock the door and wait for a supervisor, which might lead to his window being smashed and a taser being deployed. Or he could comply, allow the violation to happen, and secure the evidence needed to ensure this officer never did this to anyone else again. Thorne chose the long game. I will step out of the vehicle, Thorne said, narrating his actions for the body camera he knew was recording. I am complying with your order, Officer Vincent, though I am stating for the record that I believe this stop is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. Thorne slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible. He stepped out, standing to his full height of 6'2". He towered slightly over Vincent. The officer stepped back, his hand now gripping the handle of his gun. Turn around. Hands on the roof, Vincent commanded. Is this a Terry stop, officer? Thorne asked, placing his hands on the roof of his own Audi. Do you have specific and articulable facts that I am armed and dangerous? Vincent didn't answer. He stepped forward and kicked Thorne's feet apart. Spread 'em. He began a pat-down, his hands rough and invasive. He patted down Thorne's suit jacket, feeling the wallet, the phone, the pen. I found a wallet, Vincent said, reaching into the inside pocket. I didn't give consent for a search, Thorne said sharply. A pat-down is for weapons only. Reaching into my pocket to retrieve ID during a detention without arrest is a gray area you don't want to be an officer. Vincent ignored him. He yanked the wallet out and flipped it open. He looked at the driver's license. Marcus Thorne. The name didn't ring a bell. He missed the other card behind it, the retired credentials, the gold shield that said Deputy Chief. He was too focused on the victory of getting the ID. Marcus, Vincent said deliberately, using the first name to demean him. See, was that so hard? Now let's run you and see what warrants pop up. You are holding me without cause, Thorne said. I have identified myself. I have explained my presence. You have found no weapons. You are now prolonging this stop beyond the time reasonably required to address the initial suspicion. Rodriguez v. United States. You are clocking up civil liability by the second. Vincent laughed a short, sharp bark. You know a lot of court cases for a guy sitting in a car. That tells me you've been in the system before. Jailhouse lawyer, huh? Vincent walked back to his cruiser, keeping Thorne standing by the car. Stay right there. Don't move. By now, the neighborhood was waking up to the scene. The real estate agent, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, pulled up in her white SUV across the street. She saw her client, Dr. Thorne, a man she knew was a distinguished former police executive, standing with his hands on his car being detained by a patrol officer. She gasped, putting her car in park and grabbing her phone. She didn't call 911. She started recording. 2 houses down, a young man who followed local politics recognized Thorne instantly. He stepped out onto his porch, phone raised. "Hey!" the neighbor shouted. "That's Dr. Thorne. What are you doing?" Vincent ignored the bystanders. He sat in his cruiser typing the name into the terminal. He waited for the hit. He waited for the warrant for unpaid child support, or the suspended license or the prior felony. The screen refreshed. No warrants. License valid. Vehicle registered to Marcus Thorne. Then the employment history field populated from the state database. Previous employment: state police. Deputy Chief retired. Current status: active instructor, State Academy. Vincent blinked. He read it again. His stomach gave a strange lurch, a mix of confusion and denial. It couldn't be right. This guy, the loiterer. But instead of stepping back, Vincent doubled down. This is a psychological phenomenon often seen in misconduct cases: escalation of commitment. When faced with evidence that they are wrong, the biased mind searches for a reason to be right. He's a retired chief. Then he should know better than to give me attitude, Vincent thought. He's testing me. He thinks he's above the law because he used to be a cop. The ego took over. Vincent got out of the car, storming back toward Thorne. He didn't apologize. He didn't release him. "So you used to be on the job," Vincent said, his voice aggressive. "That's why you think you can disrespect a patrol officer. You know the drill. When I ask for ID, you give it." "I know the law, Officer Vincent," Thorne said, turning his head slightly. "And I know that you have currently detained a citizen for 18 minutes without probable cause. You have searched me illegally, and now you are engaging in a retaliatory detention because your ego is bruised." Vincent snapped. He grabbed Thorne's wrist. "That's it. You're under arrest." Thorne didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He let Vincent twist his arm behind his back. "On what charge?" Thorne asked calmly. "Disorderly conduct, resisting without violence, and failure to obey a lawful order." Vincent pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked around Thorne's wrists. The bystanders were shouting now. "He's a deputy chief," the neighbor yelled. "You idiot, look at who you're arresting." Vincent shoved Thorne against the side of the Audi, tightening the cuffs unnecessarily. "I don't care who you think you are," Vincent hissed in Thorne's ear. "On my street, you listen to me." Vincent reached for his radio to call for transport. He pressed the orange emergency button on his radio, a signal that an officer is in distress or has a non-compliant suspect. It was a move designed to bring backup fast to show force. "Unit 4 Alpha 1 in custody, requesting transport. Subject is uncooperative." Minutes later, a siren wailed in the distance. A supervisor's SUV tore around the corner, followed by another patrol car. Sergeant David Miller was the field supervisor on duty. He was a 15-year veteran, a man who took his job seriously. He had heard Vincent's voice on the radio, stressed, angry, aggressive. Miller had been worried about Vincent for months. He pulled up to the scene expecting a brawl. What he saw was a man in a suit, handcuffed, standing calmly while Vincent held his arm. Miller got out of his SUV, adjusting his belt. He walked quickly toward them. "Vincent, what do we have?" Miller asked, his eyes scanning the suspect. Then he stopped. He froze mid-step. He looked at the man in handcuffs. He looked at the face he had seen in textbooks, the face of the man who had shaken his hand at his own graduation from the academy 12 years ago. The face of the man whose signature was on the certificate hanging in Miller's office. Miller's blood ran cold. He felt a wave of nausea. "Oh my God," Miller whispered. He looked at Vincent, who was still puffing his chest out. "Sarge, this guy refused ID, was loitering, gave me attitude. I got him on disorderly and resisting." Miller looked back at Thorne. Thorne looked at Miller, his expression one of profound disappointment. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," Thorne said. "I believe we met at the leadership seminar in Springfield last year." Miller scrambled forward, pushing Vincent's hand away from Thorne's arm. "Officer Vincent, step back." Miller barked, his voice cracking with panic. "Step back right now." Sarge, what's the problem? Vincent asked, confused by the sudden hostility from his boss. Do you know who this is? Miller screamed, pulling the key from his belt. He fumbled with the handcuffs, his hands shaking. This is Deputy Chief Marcus Thorne. He runs the Ethics Division. You just arrested the man who writes the use of force policy. Vincent stood there, the color draining from his face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. The handcuffs clicked open. Miller carefully removed them. Chief, I am so sorry. I have no words. Are you injured? Thorne rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bit into the skin. He adjusted his suit jacket, straightening his tie. He looked at Vincent, who was now trembling, looking like a child who had broken a priceless vase. Thorne didn't yell. He didn't curse. He spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who knows he holds all the cards. Sergeant Miller, Thorne said. Secure Officer Vincent's weapon and badge. Place him in the back of your vehicle. I want a full inquiry initiated immediately. I want the body camera footage pulled and preserved before anyone touches a server. And I want the captain here, now. Vincent tried to speak. I didn't know. Thorne cut him off with a look. It shouldn't matter who I am, Officer Vincent. That is the point. If I were a plumber or a teacher or unemployed, I still have rights. You violated them. You violated your oath. And you did it with an arrogance that tells me this isn't the first time. Miller turned to Vincent. Give me your badge, now. Vincent slowly unpinned the shield from his chest. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped it. It clattered on the asphalt, a sound that signaled the end of his career. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The investigation didn't take months. It took days. The body camera footage was damning. It showed a polite, compliant citizen and a belligerent, power-hungry officer. The department tried to keep it quiet, but Thorne refused a quiet settlement. He sued. He sued not for the money, but to force the evidence into the public domain. The city settled for $4.5 million to avoid a jury trial that would have been a public relations massacre. Kyle Vincent was fired 3 weeks later. The review board, headed by independent auditors, cited gross incompetence, civil rights violations, and conduct unbecoming. But Thorne went further. He petitioned the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Board to decertify Vincent. He testified at the hearing himself. Vincent lost his certification. He would never be a police officer again. He was 28 with no other skills branded permanently as the officer who profiled the wrong man. The last reports heard of him, he was working in a warehouse in a different state loading trucks. The Oak Ridge incident changed policy. The Thorne rule was implemented requiring supervisors to be present before any arrest for disorderly conduct or resisting could be finalized, preventing officers from using those charges as cover for contempt of cop. Dr. Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for victims of racial profiling who didn't have his rank or resources. He eventually bought the house on Elmwood Drive. Every day when he drives his car down that street, he waves to Mrs. Higgins. She never waves back. She stays behind her curtains. But the message was delivered. We have to ask ourselves if this can happen to a deputy chief, a man who knows the law better than the officers enforcing it. What happens to the teenager who doesn't know his rights? What happens to the construction worker who just wants to get home? Justice shouldn't depend on who you are. It should be the standard for everyone. Dr. Thorne proved that a badge is a heavy thing to carry. If you aren't strong enough to carry it with integrity, you shouldn't carry it at all. Kyle Vincent learned that lesson too late. Don't let his mistake be yours. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for civil rights lawsuits paying out of their own pensions instead of the taxpayers footing the bill? And how do we fix a system where neighbors feel comfortable calling the police on people just for existing? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, please like and share it. It helps us keep the truth in the spotlight. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.